Well, as it's already been stated, this past Sunday I began a series called Seasons. And in this series, we talked about the fact that God works in accordance to seasons. We're all familiar with, the seasons of, winter, spring, summer, fall. We're all aware of that, but those are not the only seasons that God works in. Actually, he works through seasons in our lives. How many of you walk through some seasons in your life? And in every part of life, we see seasons. Hopefully, you were here last Sunday to hear the message, the foundation for this that we're going to share today. Or if not, hopefully you watched it online. Speaking of seasons, my wife and I became pastors of this church nearly 19 years ago. It's just incredible and hard to believe that it's been almost 19 years. Up until we became your pastors here, the longest that we had pastored a single church was 10 years. That was the last church that we actually planted and pastored for 10 years in Midland, Texas. Most of you know our story. When my wife and I were married at the ripe old age of 17 and actually became pastors at the age of 17. That's pretty ridiculous, all right? But it happened, and we're still at it. And but in those early years, man, we just had it all figured out, and we could get a church pastored in 2 or 3 years. It just didn't take long to get a church all pastored up in just a couple of years. But the older we got, the more we realized that we really didn't know what we were doing, and there was a whole lot more that needed to be done, and so it kind of slowed down a little bit. And so this time, we're almost 19 years into the pastorate of this church. But I'll never forget, almost 19 years ago when we were candidating to become the pastors of this church. And never forget, my wife and I we drove by this property. It was just an empty field. There was nothing on it. And I remember us both saying to one another, I don't know who said it first, doesn't matter, but we both said to one another, I wonder what could be accomplished if we gave 20 years to one place, 20 years to one ministry. And so my wife and I, when we were elected to this church, we committed ourselves to this church for 20 years. We're almost there. We're almost there. In April of next year, it will be 20 years. Just 1 year and 2 months from today, it will be 20 years. We feel that a transition is coming. I want to be clear, we are not retiring because retirement has a finality to it. And we're not retiring, but we are realigning. And I believe the word of the year is realignment. And so my wife and I will be realigning. We will step down from the role of lead pastors in April of 2023, a year from this April, 1 year and 2 months from now. You might say, Pastor, why are you doing this? Well, let me give you 3 reasons, and they're in no particular order. Number 1, we will have fulfilled our 20-year commitment that we made. Number 2, we will be 68 years old. Not now, a year and 2 months from now. Church experts say that the average lead pastor draws the most amount of people to the church that are between 10 years younger than he is and 10 years older than he is. That's the greatest draw for that particular pastor. That means my greatest appeal at age 68 will be between the ages of 58 and 78. And that's too old of a draw of people. I want to be abundantly clear that we love people 58 to 78. We love seniors. We are seniors. The only time I admit I'm a senior is when there's a discount. And then I'm first to speak up. So our church needs to grow younger, not older. Not because we don't love older people, not because older people are any less important, but how many know we don't just want this church to survive. We want it to thrive for decades to come if the Lord were to tarry his coming. And so for it to survive and thrive and move forward, it will take younger people. How many know what I'm talking about? Please do not misunderstand what I'm saying about age. This is one of the reasons why I have so many younger staff members. Try and help us, keep us younger. They think younger. They're in tune with the new, the latest, and the greatest, and all of that. And so I have them around me, and I listen to them. And most of the time, I cheer it on. You know, it's only been once or twice, you know, that I said, not going to go there. Not going there. But, and maybe there was nothing wrong with that, but it just wasn't right for the time, okay? So I believe that our church needs a younger pastor. Not today, but soon, like a year and 2 months from now. Number 3, not only do I need to experience a realignment, but our church, I believe, is in need of a realignment. It's time for our church to experience a new season. We have had our season, and we're still in our season, but our season is coming to a close, and I believe that God has a brand new season for this church. This new season will require new methods. Not a new message, but new methods in delivering the message. New methods usually come from younger people. We used to be those people. We're no longer those people. See what drew Grandma and Grandpa to the church? Those methods will not draw the grandkids to the church. Here's what we need to understand, and that is a long-tenured pastor is hard to follow. See, the church takes on the characteristics and personality of the pastors after many years. The church becomes comfortable with them. If they have been successful, the church has grown to love them, and even more important, they have grown to trust them. Following a pastor that is loved and trusted, a pastor that has grown the church over a 20-year period, a pastor that has dedicated their babies and baptized their children and married and buried year after year after year, a pastor who has built their facility, this man and his wife will be very hard to follow. Fact of the matter is, and this is documented, usually the one to follow a long-tenured, loved, honored, respected pastor, usually the one to follow them doesn't make it. Sometimes it takes a couple, 2 or 3 pastors coming and going for a few years before someone can once again become a long-tenured pastor. That happened in this church. Pastor Savage founded this church and pastored this church for 33 years. That's a long time. The man that followed him lasted 3 years. The man that followed him lasted 3 years. The man that pastored him, that followed him lasted 3 years. And then we came, and here we are almost 19 years. Usually, a long-tenured pastor is very difficult, if not impossible, to follow. Unless, say unless. Yeah, unless. Statistics say that the number one most successful transition from one pastor to another is from a father to his son. Well, my son, Pastor Chad, is not going to become the next pastor of the Grace Place. 15 years ago, he and Amber planted a brand new church from scratch in Burleson, Texas. Before the pandemic broke out, they were breaking 600 on Sunday morning. Man, I mean, they were rocking it. They still are, and they're in a strong comeback right now. They're not going to follow us. But the experts say the number two most successful transition in the case of a long-tenured, loved, honored pastor is from the pastor to any other family members, like a son-in-law and a daughter, especially if they are already on staff. I believe personally, I'm speaking personal right now, I believe personally that Shawn and Krista should be the next lead pastors of the Grace Place. And I want to be clear because I want you to understand that they will be co-pastors. Co-pastors. Let me give you 6 reasons why I believe Shawn and Krista should be the next lead pastors of the Grace Place. Number 1, I personally believe it's the Lord's will. Personally, I'm speaking personally. I have prayed about it, I have processed it, I have sought God, and I have peace in my heart to pass the baton to them. I'm not playing the God card. I'm not saying God said. I'm not playing that card. I'm simply saying, as for me, I feel comfortable in my spirit and feel peace in my spirit that they should be the next pastors. The second reason why I believe they should be the next pastors of this church is because they have the heart of this house. They have the heart of this house. They have been here for over 7.5 years, and in April of 2023, they will be here 9 years. And they've had much input in shaping this church the past 7.5 years, and will have even more input in the next year and 2 months. Shawn is already the go-to guy serving as executive pastor and my right-hand man. It wasn't very long into their coming to be a part of our staff that I recognized. I knew, because I know my daughter, I knew I had a rock star in my daughter, but, and I loved Shawn, and I liked Shawn, and I heard good things about Shawn, but I didn't know really what I was getting. And he wasn't here very long ago. I recognized, man, I got 2 rock stars here, man. Wow, this guy is a rock star. And so I recognized that, hey, he can't just be, he can't just be checking off boxes for me and, being my go and fetch guy. I need this guy to be fulfilled because I want to keep him around. And so I began to turn loose of some things and give him opportunities to minister and do things that, quite frankly, I've missed some of those things, enjoyed some of those things. I didn't release it because I was lazy. I didn't do it because I didn't want to do it anymore. I did it because, hey, man, this guy's got something to offer, and we need to let that out, empower that. I share everything with him. I'm mentoring him for the position. Already said I've already released a lot of ministry to him. Number 3, third reason is that they're qualified. They're qualified for this position. They've been in full-time ministry for 20 years. No, they have never served as a lead pastor, but they've been leaders for 20 years. They've been youth pastors. They've been worship pastors. They've been executive pastors. They've been directors of Master's Commission. They have 20 years of ministry. They are qualified and ready for this position. Number 4, I believe they should be the next pastors because they have gifts and talents that we don't have. But we have gifts and talents that they don't have. Fact of the matter is, the gifts and talents and abilities that we have is what was needed in this season. But in a new season, the gifts and talents that we have is not necessarily the gifts for the next season, but there is someone in place that has those gifts and talents and abilities for the next season ahead. I love the fact that we've been, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but we've been talking to our board for quite some time. And I'll never forget the first time that we talked about the possibility of this. And I'll never forget one of my deacons. He's very tender-hearted, and I remember him, and it was so special, but I remember him through tears said to me, "Pastor, we're really not going to lose you and Dawn." I said, "What are you talking about?" "We're really not going to lose you and Dawn." He said, "Krista is you and Shawn is Dawn." You know, when you see Krista, you see her as a worship leader, and she's an incredible worship leader, and that's why I brought her here. But I'm going to tell you something. There's a lot in that young lady. I'm telling you. I'm going to tell you something that I am so proud of my son and my daughter, and they're wise. And when I have to make a decision or I want input, I call them. They call me sometimes, but I call them and say, "What do you think about this?" That's how much listen, have an idea room, put Krista in there. You're going to take most of her ideas. It's an incredible package set in there. Both of them rock stars. Both of them have incredible gifts, talents, and abilities. What an incredible, incredible package. Number 5, Shawn is 46 and will be 47 at the time of the proposed succession. Krista's much younger. She's much younger than Shawn. We told her that 20 plus years ago. She didn't want to hear it then. Now that's what she wants to say. Shawn will be 47 at the time of the proposed succession. By the way, I was 48 when we became lead pastors of the church. But based on the 10-year thing that I mentioned earlier, he will be able to draw people ages 37 to 57, Krista 32 to 52. I believe the church will get younger after the succession. Again, not discounting older people, just telling you we need young people to move the ministry forward and keep it going. Amen? The 5th reason, and that is because we are family, the possibility of jealousy will be greatly reduced. See, it's very, very difficult for a pastor that's had an incredible ministry for 20 years. It's very difficult to lay that ministry down. It's very difficult to pass the baton. It's very difficult when you've walked through this building 1,000 times as the man of the house, and then all of a sudden you are no longer the man of the house. That's very difficult. And sometimes there's jealousy that arises from the outgoing pastor when the people begin to love on the new pastor, or maybe even from the new pastor when the people began to reminisce about how great the old pastor was. The possibility for jealousy is there, and it happens more often than not, I will tell you the truth. But I don't foresee that because this is our family. This is our family. We're going to be their number one cheerleader. Listen, this gal on the end there, we've just tootled behind her and followed her around her whole life. Whether she's at a gymnastics meet, or whether she's playing volleyball or basketball or softball or debate, or man, if they had it at school, that girl was in it, and we were right there on the front row cheering her on. That's not going to stop. We love our family, and we want our family to do even greater than we have done. Number 6, another reason for Shawn and Krista to become the next lead pastors is because the church already knows them and already loves them. See, if you bring someone into the house brand new, you really don't have a clue what you're getting. Anyone can look good on paper in a resume. How many know we all know how to make ourselves look good? And who are the references that we put in our resume? The people that love us. Anyone and all pastors have at least one good sermon, one sugar stick that they preach many times and very comfortable with. And so they come and try out and put their best foot forward and preach that sugar stick favorite sermon of theirs. And man, they go over really strong and they get elected as pastors. And then the next Sunday, they don't have another sugar stick. And while they're preaching, you're wondering, what happened to our preacher? Most people can pull off a good Sunday for a tryout, putting their best foot forward, preaching their best canned sermon. Shawn and Krista will have served this church for 9 years by the time realignment happens. You've heard them preach. You've heard them teach. You've watched them lead. This church knows them, and they will know them and their ministry even better as I pass on more and more ministry to them in the next year and 2 months. Well, this church is a sovereign church. What does that mean? That means that this church elects its lead pastor. See, I cannot appoint my successor. Even though I've been here almost 19 years, by that time 20 years, I cannot appoint my successor. And hey, I'm the presbyter of the section. I oversee churches. I oversee pastors. I'm my own overseer. I have others too, though, but that's just funny to me. But even though I'm presbyter of this section, I cannot appoint the pastor of this church because it is a sovereign church. It must elect its own pastor. My successor must be elected by the official membership of this church. So I cannot appoint my successor, but I can recommend. And you see, no one loves this church more than I do. No one loves this church more than my wife does. I've been processing this for quite some time, and I thought I was doing pretty good, and I am doing pretty good, but I can tell you that knowing what I was facing this morning, and I was okay until I opened the door of my office and I walked in and something just hit me. I love you. I love this ministry. I love this church. My wife and I have carried this church on our shoulders and in our hearts 24/7, 365 days a year for almost 19 years. Say, really, Pastor, you kind of stretching it, right? You know, you go on vacation, man, in the summertime, the last 4 years, you've taken a month off. What are you telling us? You think I'm off? Really? As long as there's a phone. There's phone calls, there's emails, there's texts. I'm not complaining. I'm just telling you, you're never off the clock when you're the lead pastor. It's in our heart. It's on our shoulders. Not complaining. It's just the way it is. Nobody wants this church to succeed and move forward after we are gone. Nobody more than us.
Chris and I came to this church, and our number one heart was to come and just simply serve. They had been in town visiting our family in Phoenix, and we had just finished, you guys had just finished building this building, and we could see the weight on them, and they were just kind of sharing their dreams. They said, man, we'd really like to go at least another 10 years. And Chris and I had been in some great places, and I looked at Chris and I said, hey, let's go lift their arms in these last 10 years, their last sprint. Let's make ministry light for them. Let's go and just give them our best. And at the time we had just had Ellie. We were married 10 years before we had Ellie. But there was just something about having Ellie, us being in ministry, them being in ministry. I told Krista, your parents are the best spiritual heritage we have. As a man, I wanted to bring a daughter back home to the family and a granddaughter back home to be raised up under this great heritage. You know, God has always, for Chris and I, shown us where to go and what to do by just simply opening doors. When I got saved at 18, it was so clear to me at that moment that God was just saying, my church is where you belong. And there was never these moments where God was like, one day go be a youth pastor or go be a lead pastor. It was just the Lord was like, serve my church. And I said, okay. And he opened doors for youth ministry. We served. He opened doors for us to lead a discipleship program called Master's Commission. We stepped in, we served. And when we came to the Grace Place, he opened the door to come and be his associates and co-worship pastors. And we said, yes, we will come and we will serve. And that's been our heart since day one, since we've been here.
Wow. I felt called to the ministry when I was 12 years old at a youth camp in the great city of Roaring Springs, West Texas, where there is no spring and it is not roaring. Kind of desolate out there, but a great place to meet with the Lord. And I remember at an altar call at 12 years old, the Lord speaking to my heart and calling me into ministry. And since that day, I really have never wavered from that. I have known that that is what the Lord has for me. Honestly, I was pretty open. Like Shawn said, when I got the call, I just knew ministry. I never, there was never like one ultimate thing. I was open, like to do worship. I was open to do youth ministry. At one point, I even thought about doing missions. Like pretty much I was open to whatever the Lord had for me. But I do have to admit that there was always one specific thing that I kind of said, I'll do anything, Lord, except one thing. And I'm sure you can probably guess what that one thing is. Kind of was like, Lord, I'll be associate pastor, I'll be worship pastor, children's youth, but I don't want to be a lead pastor. I don't know, probably just because I grew up in a pastor's home, and although it was an incredible blessing and ministry has been awesome, I also got to see the weight and the pressure that lead pastors carry. And so I kind of was just like, Lord, there's lots of people to be lead pastors. I want to go and serve those lead pastors. That'll be awesome. And so when we came here to the Grace Place, I thought we were off the hook, kind of, because when we came, a lot of you know, when we first got here, Pastor Steve and Priscilla were here. They were the youth pastors. They had been here about 5 years at that time, and they were really looked at to be the next pastors. They were kind of being groomed for that. They had a heart to pastor, and my dad had been mentoring them, and so I was like, man, this is awesome, because we can come, we can serve my parents, and then, there's no pressure on us to be the pastors, the next pastors, because Steve and Priscilla are going to do that. And we were here about a year, and Pastor Steve decided to go and move to New York City and plant the Grace Place in New York City. And I was like, man, why does he got to ruin all my plans? I'm a little bitter at him about that. So no. But so when that happened, of course, the conversations began to start. My parents talked to us and just said, hey, this is something we're thinking. What do you guys think? And where are you at? And honestly, for the first couple years, we waffled back and forth about it, never really selling out to the idea. And I tell you this not to scare you or make you think like, well, you don't want to be a pastor. What are you doing sitting up there right now then? I want to get you to this point of the story, because I want you to understand how weighty we take this decision. I do not want to do something with my life just because it makes sense. Like, it's easy to look at our story or look at our situation and go like, oh yeah, well, like, you know, you're the executive pastor, you're a pastor's son-in-law and daughter, you know, that makes sense. You guys should be the next pastor. Yeah, it makes sense. Cool, whatever. But I didn't want to do something just because it makes sense. I've never lived my life making the decisions just because they made sense. I wanted to make sure that this is what God had for us. I wanted to make sure that if this door opens to us, that we walk through and we have peace, knowing that this is we're right in the exact spot that the Lord has for us and for this church. And so, just like that altar call when I was 12 years old, about 2 years ago, I had another experience like that. I was at a service, and I was just at the altar, and like I said, we'd kind of been waffling back and forth. Lord, what do you want? What do you think? And I felt super strongly in my heart that the Lord asked me, if I open this door for you, will you submit? Will you walk through it? Will you obey? And I just felt like that burden of like never wanting to be a lead pastor, or that thing that I had kind of held on to, I felt that lift. And I just felt so much peace. And I responded to the Lord and I just said, Lord, if you open this door, I will go. I say yes. I say yes to you if this is what you have for us and this is what you want for us. And since then, we've been walking in that peace.
It was so important to us that as we entered this place of peace, if this is what the Lord has, that we were doing it with our giftings, our talents, and our abilities, and the way that God made us. And I remember thinking several times in the decision-making process, well, if I have to be Pastor Mike Benson, then, or people need me to be Pastor Mike Benson, then I'm not the guy for that, because I know that I'm not him. I have different talents, giftings, and abilities, different personality, completely different leadership style. But if people need that, then I'm not the guy. But if people would see us for who we are and God looked at us and said, yes, I just need you, just be you, I told Krista, I can do that. We can do that. If preaching the gospel and making disciples for the next season of our life is what we're signing up for, then we are all in. That's what our passion has been since day one, entering into ministry, and that's what it will continue to be. And a lot of people in transition, probably one of the biggest questions that people ask is, what is the future of the church going to look like? What's it going to be like? Well, as Pastor had mentioned, and I do want to say this about him and Dawn and their leadership, most pastors don't give the types of freedom to their staff and their team like they do. But with the freedoms that they have given us to help facilitate the vision that God has given them, when you look around the church, it is not just the heart of this pastor, but it's the heart of this team. And so if you want to know what the Grace Place is going to look like in the future, just look around. Are things going to be a little different? Sure, but just look around. The heartbeat and the vision is the same. It's to make disciples. It's to help people take next steps. We're not interested in just having a crowd on Sundays. God didn't call us as a church to do that. He didn't say build big buildings and fill them up. No, he said make disciples and send them throughout the world. And so that's what we're about. Our focus right now over the next year and 2 months is to honor them. It's to lead this church and honoring them. I think that it's so interesting that God has chosen you and that God has chosen this staff in this specific season of their life, and he's brought us right next to them so that as they make this season transition from lead pastoring, at that time it'll be 50 years, that he's chosen us. He said, hey, I want the Grace Place to have the honor of celebrating and honoring them in this huge life transition. What a great honor that is for us. And so if you want to know what we're going to be about over this next year and 2 months, it's going to be that. It's going to be honor our pastors. Chris and I have never felt more honor before. To have the trust of them is huge. They know things about us, and they know the quirks and the weird stuff and the good and the bad in ways that you don't. And to know that they look at us and say, we trust you. And we see God's calling you. This is very important to us. We're different generations. We're still different leadership styles in a way. And so we will do things different. But one of the things that we're confident in is God is not calling us to take their shoes and put them on our feet. He's calling us to walk in our shoes. And we can do that, and we will do that. We've been doing that a long time. We'll continue to do that. Now, we might have to get thicker souls because we've never carried that kind of weight before. But we are confident in what the Lord has asked us to do, and we're so good with it.
You know, this has been a really emotional journey for us. I'm sure you guys can imagine. We've been processing this, like I said, for a couple of years now. For some of you, it's the first time you've heard it. And so, you know, there's, I'm sure, a lot of things going on. And there's a lot of emotions that you're feeling. You know, there's a lot of relational dynamics we've got going on because they're your pastors, but they're my parents, and they're my pastors. So there's a lot going on there. And the way that you may be processing or sad about this transition, man, I can relate, okay? Like, I can relate. It's hard for me to imagine being here at the Grace Place without them. I don't really like that feeling. People say that succession is a lot like celebrating a funeral and a wedding all at the same time. And I think that's just one of the best descriptions that I could use to describe the emotions that we feel. You know, we're mourning the loss. Some of you, they've been your pastors for almost 20 years, some 10, 15, 5. It doesn't matter how long. They have made a huge impact on your life. And that loss is going to be felt. And so we're kind of going through a season of mourning. And I'm doing the same thing as well, but here's what I know. I know that God doesn't move someone else out. He doesn't move into a new season without also doing something new on the other side of that. Sure, there may be a funeral and there's going to be mourning, but I also know that God is not done with the Grace Place. God has big things in store. There are lives to be changed. There are people who need to hear the word of the Lord and need to be loved and cared for, and that is not going to stop. And so what I would just encourage you guys, and what we have done as a family over these last couple of years, and I'll just challenge you to do it, is embrace the awkward tension. And I don't mean tension like fighting tension. No, it's a tension between the funeral and the wedding. It's a tension between the mourning of a loss, that we need to feel those things, we need to experience that, but then also the excitement of what is to come. If over the next year and 2 months, if we can learn as a church to embrace that. And I would encourage you, use your words to express. I think, why do we wait until someone's gone to tell them how much they mean to us, right? Like, why do we need to wait? We don't need to wait for that. Let's use our words. I love it when people love me, but it's even more special to me when people love the people that I love. So don't feel awkward. Don't feel like you have to hold back because you don't want people to think, you're not excited about the future. No. It's okay in this time to express and honor our pastors for what they have done and what they have been in our lives. And I want to encourage you, use your words, speak them out. This is going to be a time of mourning and celebration, but we believe that God is going to use this season and the next season for great things to come.
The road runs both ways. We'd love to hear, that you love us and going to miss us, but we also want you to express your excitement and your enthusiasm about the next season that's coming up. I had a lady who's been in this church for many, many years, been here ever since I've been here, come to me after church this morning, the first service, hugged my neck and said, thank you for loving us enough to work through this. Said, I went through the three-year. I don't want to go through anything like that again. Thank you, Pastor, for loving us enough to set this up. So, yeah, we'd love to see a tear or two. Let me give you a tip. Get an onion, put it in your handkerchief, put it by your eyes. Tears will come. I'd love to see a tear or two, but I also want to see some joy because these are our kids. Well, obviously, we feel that the best choice for our succession are Shawn and Krista. Somebody said true success produces a successor. I believe we've done that. That's my opinion. I'm giving you my opinion. But here's what I need you to understand. If you've tuned out, please tune back in for this. You must hear this. Not only do we, my wife and I, not only do we believe this, that Shawn and Krista should be the next pastors of this church, but the entire official board of this church believes it. This is a board recommendation, not just a Pastor Mike recommendation. Much prayer and discussion and processing has gone into this. You might think, well, why are we telling you all of this now? If it's not actually going to happen for another year and 2 months, why tell us now? Good question. Thanks for asking the question. It sets me up. Here's the answer. We want this to be a smooth, well-planned, well-processed transition. We want everyone to have a time to process. Shawn and I have been talking about this for 4 years now or so. We've been talking to our board almost every board meeting for the last 2 years. We've had time to process. You have not had time to process. We want you to have time to process. So here's the timeline that we're working with. On March the 2nd, on the first Wednesday night of March of this year, just a month away, we will have our annual church business meeting. Happens every year, first Wednesday of March of every year. So at this next business meeting, just a month away, at this business meeting, the official members of this church will be allowed to vote on whether Shawn and Krista will become the next lead pastors of this church. It will be a simple yes or no vote. And if they are elected, they will become lead pastor elect. Say elect. They will not officially become lead pastors until April of next year, 2023. I will remain the lead pastor. Shawn will remain the executive pastor until then. That being said, I will involve him and Krista more and more and seek input from both of them in every decision I make. I've already promised I will not start any new programs or ministries or put anything on them new. In fact, I'm taking some things off to clear the slate and make it much easier and better for them. I will do everything in my power to set them up for future success. I will also do everything in my power for you and for this church. Hopefully, by the time the actual handoff takes place, it will be seamless and smooth. See, here's a fact. In a relay race, it's not always the fastest team that wins the race. So often, the fastest team does not win the race. Who wins the race? Usually, it's the team that passes the baton the smoothest. See, most churches take a step or two back when the baton is passed from one pastor to the other. Many churches absolutely drop the baton. We don't want that to happen to us. Let me say this morning. The process that we are going through is not original with us. We didn't just make something up. We read several books on succession. We sought professional coaching on transition. We got counsel from some long-term pastors who have walked through a transition. We have processed this with our board for over 2 years. We have done our due diligence because this is a very, very, very important matter. The health and future of this church depends on a smooth transition from the outgoing pastor and the incoming pastor. You might think, Pastor, what are you asking from us? I'm asking you to process what you are hearing and pray about what you've just heard. See, I'm expecting the Holy Spirit to speak to you, to confirm to your spirit what is in the hearts of your pastors and what is also in the hearts of the official board of this church. I'm pretty sure he has already started. In fact, I know because I've had people come to me and tell me the Holy Spirit revealed this to me. More than one person. The Holy Spirit revealed this to me before you made the announcement. So I think the Holy Spirit is already at work. Somebody told me, Pastor, you've been dropping hints now for a couple of years. If you have questions today about anything that we've talked about or anything that we have not talked about, and you have questions in the next few weeks before our business meeting, you can approach any one of us. And there's no bad questions. There's no wrong questions. And we'll be happy to do our best to answer those questions for you. And I'm asking you, please, if you have questions, get those questions asked. Do not come to the business meeting with questions. I'm giving you a month to get your questions answered. That's the bulldog coming out a little bit. Be interesting to see what kind of dog we got coming up. Never mind, not going there. All right, so we've given you a whole month in advance of the vote. Why? So that you can get your questions answered. Why? So that no one can say they were not informed. No one can say they were not given time to process. No one can say they were not given time to pray. Well, they just sprung that on us. No springing. By the time the business meeting comes, all questions, I've already said, that should be answered. A simple vote should be able to be taken. See, I love you so much that I'm doing everything in my power to set everyone up for future success. Well, you might be thinking, Pastor, what are you going to do after 1 year and 2 months? I'm going to sit in my recliner and eat chips and dip. Actually, I already do that. And my grandkids know where not to sit. They know that's Papa's chair. And they know, and my grandson loves to come to our house and jump in Papa's chair and get a big old smile on his face. But then Papa just comes over and sits on top of him. What are you going to do, Pastor? I'm going to continue to do what I love. I'm going to continue to pastor. See, I'm a presbyter. That means I'm an overseer of 23 churches and about 80 pastors or 80 ministers. I am a pastor of pastors now. And God is opening doors for me to take my nearly 50 years of ministry and pour into younger and more inexperienced pastors and ministers. And I'm getting a lot of, what's the word I'm trying to say? A lot of fulfillment out of that. And so I'm going to pastor pastors. I've begun to do a lot of troubleshooting and problem solving with churches. How many know a bulldog is pretty good at that? And I'm sure that will continue. I'll also be preaching and teaching as a guest minister and perhaps even do some interim pastoring. I don't know. It's a possibility. Pastor Shawn has told me that he wants me to preach here a couple of times a year if they become the lead pastors. My son has already told me, Dad, when this time comes, I want you twice a year, every year. I don't believe that God is through with us as ministers. He's just leading us into our next season.